Yeah, I would love to start us off. And so I'm so excited. I think we should all just like be enthusiastic because Philia is the first part of philosophy. Like, why not be excited about life anyways? I think there's a lot of heavy thoughts prior at this conference. I haven't watched everything yet. But Rick and I bonded over the idea that maybe the word crisis is used too much. I think some of our earliest kind of interpersonal interactions involved that idea. And so I just am full of excitement to be here. I think the first time I met Ryan, for example, we bonded over our love of John, our love of things other than money and work, and how exciting and open the world could be when you kind of jump into new things. I have only seen the Vervaeke Foundation grow and succeed and become more amazing since he's interacted with John Vervaeke. I think the two of them are like fruit on a tree that like help each other do something. I don't know, the metaphor maybe falls apart. He's just a wonderful human being. He's a lifelong creative entrepreneur and leader who seeks to live the philosophical way. Among many other roles and projects, he is the chair of the Vervaeke Foundation, working with Dr. John Vervaeke and the foundation's team. I think he's also a good decision maker, big picture thinker. He frequently has nice facial hair, as I was saying at the beginning, which I think is symbolic. I'm not sure, though. I can never tell with those things. It's cultural, maybe. I don't know. I wish I had more UTOK knowledge to frame how to understand Ryan's trans-temporal, awesome facial hair. Rick Rapetti is a professor of philosophy at CUNY, vice president of the American Philosophical Practitioner Association, or APPA, which has been featured in all sorts of amazing publications, does amazing work. I aspire to be a part of the APPA one day. It's a pretty amazing group. Chief Philosophy Officer at KnowledgeCoin.io, meditation instructor at the Vervaeke Foundation, author of several books on free will, among other topics, and articles on philosophy of meditation and agency. I think he's also a brilliant person in general, amazing family man, which speaks volumes. He's a great dancer. I've seen him not use jargon for like 10 hours in a row. That alone humbles me, as he's a philosopher at heart. Martin is a father, a husband, and works with and for the community in various projects where he applies his experience working for many different organizations at various scales. Again, I could say so much more about Martin. He's so generous. He's like the foundation of this conference. He's been doing work for weeks with Greg and everyone here. I think he deserves so much credit, as does Greg, who's not here. How many hours has Greg given to these conferences for virtually no status, no financial gain? Probably uses a ton of his time. It's really kind of humbling to see these people just give these countless, thankless hours for not 1 year, but 2 years in a row. Probably very cheesy, but if you know me, I'm a very cheesy person. I go to gardens and talk to old people and take classes just for fun in college and stuff. If this was the ESPY Awards, I would also thank all the coaches, God, and definitely not OJ Simpson. So I think humor should be a part of philosophy. And with that, I'll hand it over to Ryan Barton and Rick Rapetti to start things off.
Rob, can you just like be my hype man? Like, can you go around like can I be like one of those hip hop artists and you like go before me and do that hype thing? That was pretty awesome.
I'm in. Let's do it.
Yeah. Let's do the concert. You'll be the guy in the corner, like, yeah, getting everybody fired up.
Taylor has that microphone. Yeah, me and Taylor can team up, and he has sound effects. We're halfway there. Yeah,
that's perfect. Well, it is.
I have to interject, and thank you, Robert, for introducing such a wonderful, playful spirit into this. Because what we're about to do is serious play, and the play part is important. So thank you for that. That was sweet.
Yeah, well said, Rick. Good liberties with all our bios there. Well, it is great to see everybody and meet those of you that I haven't met before. We are about to have a very specific kind of conversation that is a dialectic, and not just a dialectic, but dialectic into dialogos, exploring this topic. And so I'm going to take about 10 to 15 minutes and just provide an overview of this practice. It's a practice that is really dear to me. It's become a huge part of my life and something that I really value. And we're just going to spend some time so that we can orient towards what this practice is, how it's going to flow, what you're going to not only observe, but participate in. And for some of you, this may be things you've heard many times, and hopefully it will just be helpful to hear it again. I find anytime I talk about it or I hear anyone explain dialect and dialogos, there's such richness and nuance in this practice that I always find that I gain something. And so hopefully, even if this is something deeply familiar or if this is something brand new to you, it'll be helpful to just get some of that framing for a few minutes before we begin. So There are many different types of conversations. We've all been caught in monologues where we're just the passive listener to someone who is monologuing. We're obviously very familiar with debates where there is a conquest and an attempt to win in an argument. And with dialogues where there's a sharing and a mutual sharing that may have different types of orientation. And a dialectic is something different. It is a dialogue that has a formal structure. There are 4 roles in which we are going to be engaging: the proposer, the midwife, the scribe, and the vibe. 4 distinct roles. And there are rules to a dialectic. There's a specific structure of how the conversation flows and how we will each rotate through these different roles. And this isn't just a dialectic in the classic sense of a thesis, antithesis, and synthesis. This is dialectic in dialogos, which leans on the work of Dr. John Vervaeke, as explicated in great detail in the series After Socrates, where he worked to reverse engineer the ancient art of dialectic as we see in the Platonic dialogues. Where this is not just something to explore a propositional concept, but a practice to actually participate in, to explore something like a virtue. So in dialectic and dialogos, we are offering ourselves to the logos. We are seeking to be a vessel to that organizing pattern that comes through our conversation and through our beings and organizes and directs us. And we typically do a dialectic and dialogos around a virtue. We're oriented to a virtue because for a few reasons. One is obviously it's in keeping with the tradition of Socrates and Plato, and we see this in many of the Platonic dialogues. We see that this is oriented around a virtue. But it's also because a virtue is that little slice of the infinite. It is that piece which we can participate, that can land deeply within our being and become a habit and something ingrained in us and pull us all the way out into connection with the infinite. And a virtue is something that there is no end of. Even something simple like patience. I'm amazed when I do these practices on a virtue that you think you have a pretty good sense of. There's an unending unfolding to every virtue. And so there's an apophatic nature of this practice by design, where we are being drawn in further and further. And by together orienting towards a virtue, we're able to bring ourselves, offer ourselves the virtue, and then move this from being just propositional. You'll hear argument, you'll hear propositional content, but it drops it down into something that is participatory, where we're actually engaging with the presence of the virtue and with each other through this. Of course, this comes also out of third way Platonism and the idea that these dialogues are to be read as a drama. And so there's a drama to this structure. There's a drama to the way that we're going to engage this. And you can think of this as a drama. Now, a little bit more about those 4 roles. So it starts with the proposer. Proposer's job is to sort of drop down and reach into the darkness and grab hold of something, to sort of recklessly abandon all other preconceived notions they've had, all argumentation, anything about the structure, reach out into the dark and grab the hold of something and pull. And they say, I propose this definition of something. And today we're playing with justification. And if it's virtuous and whether it's a virtue, we're going to get to do some really cool play around that. But Rick, who's going to lead us off as proposer, is going to reach in and pull. And then the midwife's job is to get really close and to say, okay, here's what I heard you say. Am I hearing this? What's missing? What else is calling to you in this? Where's the life in this? And the midwife's job is to sense with the proposer what the life is and to get close. The midwife kind of abandons all the advanced argumentation, doesn't need to build up the argument in his or her head, just gets close and feels for the life and tries to pull it out, tries to use other language and active listening to pull out what there is, because we are trusting in this, that there's a life that's going to be born through the proposer. There's something that's moving. This is not just the product of propositional argumentation. This is the product of something deeper that's moving through us. So this is in the essence of Socratic midwifery. And then, of course, there's a third role, which is the scribe. The scribe's job is to be non-dramatic and very much just tracking the proposition. Here's where the proposal started. Here's how it moved and where it turned. And here's where the proposal ended. Here's the propositional content of the structure. And what that allows us to do is, and the rest of us in the roles, is we get to kind of abandon tracking that because we can rely on the scribe. So we can pay more attention to attuning to the life and not have to track all the beats of the argument because we have the scribe there. And then the fourth role is the vibe. The vibe is in a way the inverse of the scribe, who pays attention to and is attuning to everything non-propositional, the body language, the gestures, the tone, the sense of embodiment, the communication below the surface. And the vibe, when the vibe gives a report, it's really like what was the one moment where something changed, where there was a tone shift, there was something that opened up. If we think of this as a drama, it's kind of the stage manager who's not tweaking endlessly, but saying, here's the one thing where the drama changed. And that's the production. That's the job of the vibe. Now we all get a turn to start in these roles. So we're going to start with Rick as the proposer. I'll be the midwife. And then Martin will start as the scribe. Robert is the vibe. And we're going to do 4 rounds where we rotate after each round. And a round is made up of 4 A's. There are 4 A's in each round. First is appreciation. So the proposer starts with appreciation. And so if you're picking up a proposal after, like it comes second, third, or fourth in the round, you really start with appreciating the person who's come before you and who they are and how they brought it. Appreciate the proposal. What was it that you really appreciated? And then what is it that you want to bring forward? What's great about that you want to bring forward, because these proposals build one after the other. These aren't 4 separate proposals. This is a play that we're doing together. This is music we're creating together. And so there's appreciation. That then moves into anticipation. Here's my general sense of what's missing. Here's what's calling to me. Here's where I want to take this proposal next. That moves into amplification. That's the dialogue with the midwife, this 2-way moving where it's amplified, it's drawn out, that baby is born. And in the midst of that, we may or may not experience the 4th A, which is aporia. That is that Socratic state of being at the edge of understanding, reaching that embodied sense of like, I don't know. And the midwife may experience aporia, the proposer may experience aporia. And if you see that where we're kind of stuck or we sit in silence, that's not the practice going off the rails. That's actually one of the most beautiful parts of this practice, is that we will seek to throw ourselves into this practice in such a way that we are at the edge of what we understand, that we are constantly pushing and going to where the life is, not playing with dead argumentation that we've all been thinking about for years. But of course, there's so that's the rounds. And of course, there's not just 4 roles here. There's a 5th, which is the rest of you who are not spotlighted in these 4 of us. And the role of that is not to be a passive listener, but just as in a play is not truly a play until there's an audience. And an audience isn't an audience if it's passively observing. An audience is an audience when it's caught up in the drama and is participating with. And our invitation to you is to offer yourself as a vessel to the Logos as well, to participate with us, to help us turn this so it's not performative that we're doing this in front of others, but actually adds to the liveness, the richness that I can feel in my body now, an extra excitement. I practice this practice all the time in many different ways, and I love it, but I can feel a sense of aliveness because there's more people here. And so offer and add that to us and with us. And then after we've done these 4 rounds, we're going to move into a free speech of Dia Logos. That's where the idea is that the Logos has hopefully showed up. We've caught some pattern, and we do a free and open dialogue at that point. And then we'll have some Q&A that comes at the end. And I'll just share, I find this practice has been really meaningful to me. It's something the Reiki Foundation offers, a 12-week teaching that I highly recommend. There are practice sessions. This is something that is now an ongoing weekly and daily and informal ways practice that has been really impactful for me. And when I experience it, I experience it a bit like music, that the proposer is offering a melody and the midwife is coming in with harmony and accentuating certain notes and pulling and drawing out that melody. And then the scribe is like the kick drum that keeps us on beat, that makes sure that through each round we don't lose the beat. And then the vibe is like the bass guitar, which is if you know anything about bass, it's like that instrument that you don't ever really listen to, but you're aware of its absence. It's like that thing in the gut of its absence. And together becomes music. But of course, when we're playing music, if we play with others and for others, that's when that music really lives and comes alive. And that's what I feel this sense of anticipation for, even as we go into this, as we go into this exploration, using this beautiful practice of dialectic into Dia Logos. Rick, what would you add to that explanation of the practice, and then take us into it?
Almost nothing. That was really, I think that was the best description of this practice that I've ever heard. So I'm glad that you were the one who gave that. That was perfect. And it's being recorded. I'm going to play that again for my own learning. That was spectacular. I love the music analogy. I'll add one thing that might help people think about the vibe, because I had the most difficulty understanding the vibe when I was first practicing this. And a nifty way for me to kind of classify it in my conceptual schema where it kind of clicks is that the vibe is the scribe of the nonverbal. That just works for me. So I thought I'd share that. I don't know if it's anyone else. All right. So
if you're super left brain, like an analytic philosophy teacher, the vibe is like an alien world. You're like, what? Right. People have feelings in their body, and I can pay attention to bodies and learn about someone's soul. But it's really not that complicated. It's a very fun role. And
Yeah,
if
and
you've never
this,
done this too, I think it should be plugged, like Ryan said very clearly, like try it out at the Vervaeke Foundation. The STOA used to do it for free. They do the circling, the DID weekend still. Like if you're at all curious and have never heard of this before, especially because it can be online, check it out. It makes your fingers tingle. It's very good stuff. As Ryan poetically was saying, I think you're like a poster child for your own self there, Ryan. That was very, very beautiful, I think. Not to interrupt. I'm sorry, Rick.
spectacular. No. And just for the folks looking at me, I have a sty and it frequently tears, so I won't be getting emotional. Probably if you see a tear coming out of one eye, I'll be wiping this eye periodically, tearing a lot.
Are you telling the vibe to not pay attention to the time the tear rolls down your cheek?
Yeah, that's the clue for the vibe and the audience. They're participating, as Brian said. All right, so this is a little challenging. To think of justification as the target concept for this practice, because normally we pick a virtue and it's not obvious that justification is even in the conceptual category that a virtue might be in, like courage, generosity, patience, etc. So, but I've been in this place before where there were virtues that were targets. And then maybe in the process, we discovered that it might not be a virtue and that some other non-named thing similar to it might be the virtue and it doesn't have a name and all that. So all of that's automatically like built in and foundational to my approach to this. I've always had that experience. So it's like a little bit of a preface for where I'm going to come from. So, and like we picked justification because that's a big deal in UTOK, in Greg's philosophy. Like justification is central to being human or a person at the person scale or whatever. So we wanted to try to bring justification into dialectic to dialogos. So how do you do that? It's not necessarily a virtue. So I can't help but think maybe the best way for me to try a proposal is to imagine that there are just and unjust uses of justification, and that a just use of justification would be a virtue, or there are virtuous and vicious uses of justification. So that's a little bit of a kind of contextual framing, but I don't have a definition yet. So I have to see what I could pull out of the dark, Ryan, because I didn't want to come in here canned, but that part was already in my mind. And I shared that with Ryan beforehand, that this is what I was going to do. But I think it's helpful to even just also for the participants just listening to understand that we normally do this around a virtue. It's easier to grab a virtue than to grab something that might not be, and try to find something that is a virtue connected with it. So we don't have a name for the virtue or the virtuous use of a justification, but that's what I want to try to grab in from the dark. So I propose that a just or virtuous form of or use of justification is one that is appropriate under the circumstances. Not every time somebody gives a justification does it strike anyone as appropriate. So it has to be contextually appropriate. And I'm going to try to shoot for a model. So there are degrees toward which something is this unnamed virtue. So the ideal version of a virtuous justification is contextually appropriate, but delivered in a way that exemplifies right speech, the concept that you get out of Buddhism. So it should be some combination of true and useful and not harmful, that sort of thing. I can leave those unspecified. And I think that's enough that I'd like to start with. And we could, of course, with the midwife, Ryan might be a whole more.
Can you try saying that proposal in less words? I'd love to hear a succinct version.
Thank you. It's a contextually appropriate. Oh, yeah. So now I realize something missing. A contextually appropriate use of language to, and here's what I sense was missing, to not only explain, but communicate the rightness of whatever it is that's being justified.
Can you say more about contextually appropriate?
Yeah. So it might be inappropriate for Greg Henriquez to get up in church during a mass and start offering UTOK justifications, right? Nothing in the service, in the ritual of the liturgy calls for that. That would be an interruption. Another, and we can often find our way into the positive thing by looking at the negatives.
Mm-hmm.
Another thing might be in ordinary interrelational activities and flow states, it might interrupt a beautiful flow to pause it and offer some kind of justification for one's participation in a shared experience.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So, and the second one was an interruption, and so was the first one. The second one just takes you out of the flow, let's just say, maybe.
Mm-hmm.
But if somebody, I don't know, let me stop there for now and let you chew on that.
Well, what I'm hearing is that you're exploring, you have a sense of this path where justification is a process that is virtuous when it's walked down a certain path in a certain way. Am I getting that right?
Yes. Yeah, the situation either calls for a justification or affords one, so that if one is offered, it's experienced as not experienced as some kind of interruption. It's experienced as appropriate. This is vague.
But I'm hearing in the examples that this is justification outwardly, like in a social setting like church, and inwardly, like a part of the psyche offering justification during a flow state.
Oh, good. Yeah. So my ordinary instinctive intuition, which might be a mistake, I realize now by this good midwifing question, is to think of it as interpersonal, but it could be intrapersonal. I might need to justify to myself how I've been prioritizing my time or my activities. I might need to reflect on it and examine the reasons for it and see if they justify the distribution of my disposable time, let's just say.
Can you give an example now? You gave a negative example. Can you give an example? You've been sort of doing this with your hands, like of offering an appropriate context, an appropriate virtuous justification.
Okay, sure. Suppose there's a conversation going off the rails. I'm a philosophy professor. Now I have to kind of balance allowing students to go off in tangents and have a voice, and also kind of keep mindful of the pedagogical curriculum. Now, I might have to interrupt a student or stop a whole direction. And if I do that without offering an explanation, which would be functioning as something that would satisfy that the student might feel that was appropriate, that was acceptable, he interrupted me, but it was just under the circumstances, I would offer an explanation of this is interesting or whatever, but we only have so much time. And I want to make sure we cover this most important thing, the conclusion of this argument, right? Something like that. That might be an example where I offer a justification. And I think when a justification is called for, it's because there might be some kind of contextual impression that's natural that kind of calls out for one, like there was a disruption or something unexpected or something that deviates from the norm, right? So those are things that might invite or even require a justification. Like if somebody does something drastically unexpected, you want them to explain why they did that. So a justification is a kind of explanation of why something is happening or did happen or should happen, something like that. That's
Okay, so let me see if I'm tracking with you well. So I'm hearing in all of your examples that there's a flow of life. There's a classroom dialogue. There's a church service. There's a flow of meditation. There's something happening. And then there becomes a need because of interruption, inward or outward force, sort of either way. There becomes a need to justify, to say, are we aligning to some normative standard? And there's sort of an appeal, and there's a need to offer some explanation, some check of our behavior, of our flow here against a normative standard. Am I hearing you right?
Yeah. And when you said that, it made me think about intelligibility and rationality. So it might even be, well, those are norms too, right? Rationality. So if there's any kind of appearance, even phenomena, appearance of some kind of misalignment, misgripping, whatever, that something seems off, appeal to intelligibility. If it's off for a good reason, then that's when a justification is appropriate. That's what I would suggest.
Does the justification happen either way? Because sometimes you're justified and found that you are just in the right action, and sometimes the justification shows an action to be correct. Is it justification both times?
Very good. Very good. So yeah, you can simply introspect to see, is the state of affairs right now properly gripping what it should be gripping? Right. And then you will notice whether or not the justification works.
Nice. So I hear that you're tracking that there's like this process of justification, but you're tracking some kind of sense of a virtue, and you just brought intelligibility in. So is the virtue that you're tracking that which connects our process of justification to intelligibility?
That sounds great. Could you say that again, Ryan?
Okay, that's me then. I don't mean, I'm trying to connect to what...
No, I think you're articulating what I'm trying to grab.
Good. So I've heard you explicate a process of justification that happens that may be to a good normative standard or may not be to the right normative standard. Like you have this process of justification, and then you had this appeal to intelligibility sort of up here. And so is that thing that you're tracking in this, that which is calling us into the right relationship with intelligibility, like of justification's right relationship? Is that what you're tracking?
2, 1, 2.
I like that. There may be more, but that's certainly correct. That's really good. I think that might cover an awful lot of what all my previous intuitions were trying to get at.
You want to try a second proposal? See if you can wrap it up. I'm sorry, I didn't interrupt.
No, there's no interruption there, because that's what I was trying to figure out. Okay, how could I word that now? So, virtuous justification, not even giving, but because if you're even just introspecting one, so whatever that is, instantiating in some way or invoking intelligibility whenever there's some kind of question about whether or not the agent-arena relationship is properly related or something like that. I know I'm adding a little more, but I'm trying to nail it down a little bit. If there's ever a question about the agent-arena relationship, whether it's in a flow state or not, even in a flow state, you might be mountain climbing and then have to reflect on whether or not. So, and justification, okay, I did this with the rope, and that with the hook, and yeah, okay, that's good. Let me keep going. So you come out and look at it and jump back in, maybe.
I like that.
Adding more, but.
I like that. Okay, so for Martin's sake as scribe, could you say in a fewer words that proposal, and then we'll get his report?
Martin?
Do you want to, Rick, try to say it, or do you want to just go with it?
I can repeat what I capture and to see if you're happy with that, Rick, if that will work.
Yeah, justification. I'm all over the place, so I'm going to rely on the scribe a little here.
Yeah, so your final, fast forwarding to your last proposal, justification as a virtue is the invocation of intelligibility when there are questions about the agent-arena relationship.
The gripping, yeah, the optimal or the contact, as John would say, right? Contact epistemology, right? Am I in contact properly?
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Informing, that sort of thing. That sounds good to me.
How does that feel, Rick? Did that feel like what you kind of wanted to get out?
That's good. That's great. Yeah. We don't have a name for that, though.
Yeah. Well, we got more rounds to go.
Yeah, we're using justification. There's a virtue of using the justifications in an appropriate manner.
I like that. I like that. All right. Well, if that feels good, then Martin, you want to give your scribe report?
Sure. Right now, so Rick, you started out trying to make a distinction between just and unjust ways to justify uses of language, basically. But your first proposal was justification is a virtue when it's appropriate under the circumstances, that is contextually appropriate, but delivered in a way that exemplifies right speech. And you alluded to what that is from a Buddhist perspective: true, useful, not harmful, and a combination of those. Then you reproposed and said justification as a virtue is a contextually appropriate use of language to not only explain, but communicate the rightness of whatever it is that's being justified. There was a mention about justification being a path that's virtuous when it's walked a certain way, that it's also experienced as appropriate in context, that is a kind of explanation of what's happening, why it's happening, and where it's happening in the context of interruptions. So that felt important in your proposal. That justification is the proper gripping of the state of affairs. Justification is the calling into a proper relationship with intelligibility. And again, just to repeat the final proposal, which is what everything else led to, is justification as a virtue is the invocation of intelligibility when there are questions about the optimal gripping of the agent-arena relationship.
Thank you, Martin.
Excellent. Good tracking. Fiber, Robert?
I'm so excited. Yeah, I thought it was so great the way as you started to have this space, Rick, to reflect that Ryan was giving you. You were like, aha, aha. And then as you had these ahas, Ryan started to be really active. His body became perky, and his arms were moving up and down, and he was moving towards his camera or towards you and things like that. And then after that, there was some resonance, and then all of a sudden you go, I like where we're at. I really thought that was kind of that there was this vibing happening, and you were reasoning and very open. And then as Ryan was hearing you, he was getting excited as well. I thought that was kind of cool the way this practice started at this very philosophical level. You were almost I think nervous to share your definition. You're like, oh gosh, people are going to quote me on this definition. But then you relaxed, and then Ryan really, I think, kind of induced that kind of comfort where you were talking about the concepts that Martin was enumerating. So yeah, that was excellent. And Ryan also, again, his body language, I thought was very serious, just to vibe on Ryan for a second. And his intensity, I thought, was really brought a different interaction to the entire conversation that probably wouldn't have been present if Martin or I or anyone else. I love that the uniqueness of the players, as John might say, in the game is actually part of the process. So
thank you, Robert. That was beautiful and a good description of what it felt like. Well, so now we switch roles for everybody tracking. So now I become the proposer. Martin is the midwife. Robert is the scribe, and Rick becomes the vibe. And so I'll start with appreciation and Rick, I so appreciate you. You are a mark of aspiration for me, of the depth of philosophical training and understanding that you have, and the abandon with which you embrace a beginner's mind and exploring these kinds of things. And you could show up in so many ways that could make, and you just show up as so playful that it is really, I really appreciated that in our interaction, was just how playful and how live this was for you. And I appreciated just getting to walk with you. You really brought me in easily to your thinking of where it was clear and where it wasn't. And it felt like we quickly synced up. And I really appreciated that in what we got to do. And I appreciate this concept of justification. There's a lot calling to me in this. I appreciate how you've brought, I want to bring all that you sort of this process that keeps calling us to appeal to some normative standard and to intelligibility and sort of check against it, and how this shows up inward and outward. I really like all that you brought there. And so I want to bring all of that forward into my proposal. And what I anticipate is I want to play with whether it's intelligibility or what it is we're appealing to. And I just feel like I want to extend this line. You have these examples, and I want to draw it out. I think this process is really, really fundamental, and I'm having a lot spark. So having said all of that, Martin, boy, how to make this succinct. I propose that justification is a way from our deepest psyche out through multiplicity within and in society and in culture all the way up. It's the process by which we can invite and connect to the logos.
I'm trying to paraphrase you, perhaps with a few editings here. So justification is the process by which one takes the multiplicity that exists within oneself in relation to society, and that's in the service to the logos for everybody involved there.
Yeah, what I would propose that justification is this innate experience that we sort of have to justify. There's something instinctual and required about it. And that are the parts of our psyche have that requirement. We have that in society and culture, and sort of it goes up, and that it becomes virtuous, or that we're tracking this virtue that would allow it to connect. And Rick said intelligibility, I said logos. I mean, to me, it's something of like an offering to the pattern, the organizing pattern, and that whatever it allows us to orient our justification to the logos, that would be the virtue that we're tracking. It's almost like, I realized I did this with my hands, and it's almost like justification is one half of the double helix, like in a DNA. And whatever the virtue is that allows it to be bound to the logos, where the logos is the other half, that's the thing that allows justification from way the deepest recesses of our psyche up all the way through culture, all the way out.
Oh, that's super nice to visualize as well, that double helix picture. So if I'm understanding you correctly, whatever it is that we have in deepest corners of our psyche, that's just a half that like expresses itself in the form of justification. But there's this striving to connect us with the logo. So what would you call the other half that is needed? And I need to realize that that's the part that perhaps it's unnamed as of yet, but does anything come to your mind when it comes to like decoupling of the double helix so that it kind of points up in a way? What is it that our the deepest parts of our psyche connects with?
Yeah. Oh, okay. So let me back up to let's be peripatetic here for a minute to walk around that and to get to that. So what's connecting for me? Okay, so I practice IFS, internal family systems, which treats the psyche as lots of parts and there's dialogues. And one of the interesting things is if we put that in relationship with Pierre Grimes and philosophical midwifery, he's big on the pathologos, that there are stories within us where the organizing pattern is like it's a pathologos. It's not the truth. So you're traumatized as a kid because every time you go out to want to explore your own desires, it makes your dad angry and he beats you. And it's like, okay, you have a wrong story that lands in your psyche, right? And what I've found in IFS is that the parts all justify their behavior. They say, like, look what would happen. There's a justification inherent always within the deepest. And of course, we could take this in culture, but I think I'm being drawn to the psyche. That's where I'm being drawn. And so, Pierre Grimes in philosophical midwifery is like, all right, how do you engage the pathologos to draw that to the logos, where it becomes an organizing pattern to the ultimate principle of reality rather than some alternate and broken reality. And so everything of pathologies are broken connections to reality. And so the work of therapy and all of that and philosophical counseling is to orient people to reality as fully as possible. And so whatever is doing that in those sessions feels like the same thing that you're talking about. So if we're sitting with someone and we're able to attune to them and hear and name it, and the pathologos breaks free and the logos connects, that feels the same kind of thing to me. What happens for you when I say that?
Yeah, no, that again, I think that example is very good, because I'm imagining when you said, like, for example, you are bringing back these memories that are sending you to some particular places, and there will be a justification emerging. But perhaps that justification emerging, to go back to Rick's proposal before, does not really afford that optimal gripping on reality that will conduce you
right
to the ground of being, right? So what can you identify in those practices that, is there anything that comes to mind when it is like, so I see myself justifying myself, but there's something else happening here that is actually making me see that I'm not optimally gripped to reality. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm.
It does. This is where I'm sort of, All right, whether this is aporia or my desire to just like push this dialectic forward to the next stage, the only word that comes to mind for me is spirit. And the reason I say that is that my experience with people, and when I meet with them one-on-one or whatever, or in my own life, like my own harm, my own pathologos that has broken free, is that it's this feeling of something that's beyond me that bubbles up, that comes from the ground of being itself, that bubbles up, that there's something, I mean, like the brain wants to heal at a neurological level. The psyche wants to orient and integrate. And like, we want to connect to the logos. Like there is something inherent in life that bubbles up, that wants to break out of deception and stuckness and to connect to oneness and to being. And whatever that thing is what it feels like to me, is what is breaking us and calling. And the only word I have for it is spirit. It doesn't feel like a single virtue. It just feels like the sacred, like the sacred mystery of life that we participate in, that allows all of this multiplicity and oneness to connect at all of these different levels. Like that mystery is what I feel like I'm beholding whenever that happens. And it makes me just kind of like do this. And that's my inclination right now, is to say, let me just repropose and let you and Rob deal with that.
Sounds good.
So my proposal is that justification properly brought into relationship with spirit can lift us and connect us to life, light, love, and logos.
How does that feel?
Mysterious, and like I'd like to get more detail, but like that's all I got for now. Like it feels like the baby's out, and that was really helpful, Martin. Thank you.
I just want to savor that you're an adult, right, Ryan? You just said it feels like the baby is out. Like, I don't hear that every day. If I went to a Starbucks and heard that from exactly you that I saw, I'd try to preserve that memory for like months, because there's an aporetic moment. I know maybe a lot of you have not dove into John's work, especially his last series, but that's very powerful for someone to say that. I just want to, like, maybe for a minute or 2 minutes, just sit in silence, and if I feel satisfied just hearing you feel satisfied, Ryan. Like that's profound what you said.
Robert, you're stealing my thunder. That's a vibe remark. All right, go ahead, Scribe.
Yeah, so it started kind of innocently. He said, we're innate justifiers. There's some virtue. We need to connect. And then very quickly it got into the depth of psyche. I was listening very closely when he said that, because that can mean almost anything from anyone. I know Ryan well, but I think it was very interesting when he said it. My ears perked up, you could say. And then he talked about trauma and anger and dads beating people. So now again, like the psyche now has power. This is not some wimpy psyche, some meta modern, I don't know what the mind is kind of thing. Like this is the human psyche he's talking about. Like this is, and then he even defined spirit, and then started, I think that was where this kairos, it kind of exploded in meaning. And he said, like, there was this thing beyond me or us or whatever, people interpersonally and extrapersonally, that is sacred. It's more like there's this moreness. I think Rick might invoke some like Eastern moreness, Alan Watts vibery. We already talked about the great Pierre Grimes. And so this desire to connect to this oneness, this like, it's weird because there was this paradox to me, because there's this beautiful oneness that we're desiring to go to, that you were saying, Ryan. And then also there's these parts of us that have anger and trauma. And it's like, your proposal was really trying to get at these multiple levels of reality, almost using the main thing that John talked about last year. And even the 4 L's, if no one's heard of that, John spoke upon that quite a bit for about 6 months, not that long ago. And it ended in this invocation of mystery. So even though we were here to justify and be rational and logical, there was this almost like humbling aspect to what you were defining, that was saying like, oh, there's a mystery that almost like wishes it could be justified by human beings, but like it defies that. And then you were like asking for more detail and more time with this idea, and you just said like, wow, the baby is born or whatever, which I feel, again, just it humbles me. I get chills just contemplating the idea that happened to you. So I hope that summarized the logos that you guys were talking about.
Thank you.
Well, Robert took some of my vibe work already, so thank you for that. But I will second what he said, but I will definitely add to it. And in the same way that you kind of complimented me and the philosophical humility and all that stuff, I'm just incredibly impressed, not just by all the things that you said, because that in and of itself was really just like a flowering, but your gesturing and your enthusiasm, your vibe, your energy, you were exemplifying what I meant when I said it needs to be delivered appropriately, right? Not like you're lecturing at someone or whatever, like you just completely in the, what is described, the vibe I said is the scribe of the nonverbal. I saw the nonverbal manifestation and exemplification of almost everything that you were saying. All of your gestures seemed so appropriately communicative of what you were saying. And you were so excited. Your energy was just so infectious to me. And I always find that about you. This is just phenomenal to me. And then Martin, equally, as midwife, you lit up, and curiosity was just, if somebody like, this representationalism like Michelangelo and the Pietà or something like that, if somebody wanted to pull Plato's form of curiosity and put it in art, it would be a screenshot of your eyes when you were asking him questions, because the curiosity was just so vivid in you and in your body language, everything. So I really enjoyed watching this non-verbally, but I couldn't help but really appreciate what I was hearing at the same time. And that fed into my, of course, interpretation of the nonverbal. Great to be.
There is a lot to appreciate there, my friend. I really like the way that you built upon what Rick proposed before. Even though there was some discussion or conversation around the connection or justification used as part of the journey to something greater than what's being justified, you brought in the sacred, something very vivid, something that means a lot to people, but at the same time kind of be pinpointed to something very specific. And that in connection with the deepest parts of the psyche of a human being, something that is, I don't want this to sound reductionist, but something that is kind of lies underneath, in a way, everything that we use, more superficially speaking, to justify yourselves. And the example that you gave landed the point home beautifully, in my perspective. So I really appreciate that, really appreciate everything that both Rob and Rick mentioned about the way that you conducted yourself, with the gestures, with the energy. That's very, very common in you, but it's uncommon at the same time. So deeply appreciate all of it. And in terms of anticipation, I would like to. I think that there is that I would like to double click in a way in this part, in this differentiation between like the deepest part of our psyche and what's kind of above it in a way, and that in connection with the sacred. I think that, well, this, as I mentioned before, the sacred means different things to different people, but we feel that all of us, I think that we feel that it's something greater than ourselves individually. So, Robert, my friend, I like to.
That was pretty profound.
I would like to propose to you. I would like to propose to you that justification is that which comes from deep within oneself, with the, let me take a step back here. Justification is an expression of the soul that seeks to be seen instead of just merely looked at.
So you said, just to repeat it back to you, said justification is an expression of the soul that wants to be more than seen and looked at. The last part, could you say that again?
Yeah, justification is an expression of the soul that wants to be seen as it is instead of just looked at.
Looked at. What does it feel like to have something just looked at? What does that mean to you? Like, have you ever felt just looked at where you weren't really seen, maybe?
I think that there's a difference between seeing ourselves as we really are, and instead of just being looked at. And justification in the unjust sense, to go back to Rick's proposal, is more about justifying myself. Hey, I did this or that because of X and Y. And people on the other side may take that as to mean, okay, or even take that as face value, or believe that perhaps there is something lying underneath that high level justification.
Yeah. Let's play with that. That's good, because Ryan talked about opposing, right? And so there has to be badness, or the potential of badness, for goodness to be possible. So what does bad justification look like? Like let's use the negative to explore what the virtue might look like.
Yeah, I think that badness in this context, and just to throw something very high level here, will be the false appreciation of just the language realm, not what lies underneath, what goes beyond the language realm. So the sacred, in contrast, which, going back to Ryan's proposal, will be more around what's human about the justification, and then the ability to see that, or try to not to see that in a way that I grasp it and I collapse the wave function, so to speak, so I understand who you are. But it's more of there's an opening here that allows me to go beyond what I'm just hearing, what I'm looking at. There's an opening that is lying in my horizon.
So if someone is superficial, is that what you mean? So if I'm acting like pretentious and superficial, like I like Taylor Swift, I like Joe Rogan, I'm a good person, I'm so cool, and then I actually am like, as soon as I leave the room with you, I'm like, Martin sucks, I hate talking to him, and like I just bash you, or Greg Henriquez, like I was just praising him. If I left this right now and then I started bashing him, would that be the kind of like language BS that you were talking about, or is that way off? Because that's just an intuition, I guess.
Well, I think that it will be a good example of just trying to only grab the language aspect of the communication there and walking away with an impression that is incomplete, really incomplete.
Okay, what are the other things besides the grip that would like draw someone towards virtue if they were like guided by these ideas besides the language grip?
I think that there needs to be some sort of recognition that the language being used in any communication is just a tool, but the tool that is being used by people to act in the world, but that's just a tool. That's like nailing to something very specific. I want to do something very specific. I'm going to use a tool. It's like, imagine when you want to use a hammer, for example, to hammer that particular nail. So the entire world collapses around you to hammer that particular nail. So imagine in a conversation, I want to drive a point home and use language for that purpose. But that doesn't mean that all there is to it is what I just said. Like, for example, to your example, like I like Taylor Swift.
Okay, so let me try and track that a little bit. So you're saying that if people focus too much on language and reasoning, maybe even, they might narrow their kind of like perspectival knowing down in such a way that they're going to limit their like vision. I think in Buddhism there's right vision, so they have like a worse perspective or vision because of this parasitic processing in the language game or something? Like, can you paraphrase? Does that sound close? I'm having trouble tracking because I asked you about what a bad example was, and then you started talking about language only. Like, is there an action of, yeah, I'm sorry.
Yeah. No, it's okay. Yeah, I think that it's a difficult conversation. We've been trying to point to something that is yet unnamed. I guess that in a way, I'm trying to introduce the perspective that perhaps justification is not a one-sided process, but it's more something that is done in relationship, not only to the sacred, as Ryan put it before, but something that's, I think that also Ryan mentioned that it's the multiplicity, even as members of society, of like social species, that we engage in justification, and when we do it properly, then and only then we can point to the sacred. Which is
what does that feel like when it's done properly? If you've ever experienced that in your life, or like seen it in someone you trust or something in their life?
Yes, yeah, I think I have. Hard to confirm that though. I'll say
Don't be
that
critical. Let's not be overcritical while we're exploring the logos. Yeah, just what's your first impression if you were to?
Yeah, I think that I've experienced that in these practices, by the way, in DID practices, that regardless of what, and not, I wouldn't call it in spite, but because of what's being said propositionally, we know collectively that we are in the service of something else. So I think that this practice itself is like justification done like in a virtuous manner, in a proper manner. But that justification is not a process that I engage in just by myself. It's a process that I engage in by means of you, for example, being in a relationship and communicating with me.
Yeah, that's excellent. So let me just paraphrase. So like Rick was talking a lot about how intention and logic and the mind matter. Then Ryan really oriented towards the other people and the sacred. And you're saying like a good justification has to be almost like transcending one person's reason, because it's a group process and it's like outside of our control individually a little bit. Does that seem resonant with what you were saying?
I think that's right. And it's, again, always in relation to what Ryan said before, the sacred, which to me, I don't know if the sacred is the same as our shared humanity, but I have like this inkling that it has to do with that in a very
I like that, because then if
way.
you just say our humanity, there's no religious connotations and stuff, because it transcends even any one group, which I don't know if this conference is a big like groups and categories kind of conference, but when people get obsessed about groups, they sometimes lose humanity. Yeah, so I love that your aspect is kind of going to that. Is there more you want to add to that, or kind of
I'd like to,
I might not be highlighting well?
Yeah, I'd like to update my proposal there. Thank you, Robert. That was really, really helpful. So I would like my final proposal for now to be justification is the collective process that we engage in to put ourselves in right relationship with the sacred, which at minimum is our shared humanity.
Wow. So scribe, shall I? There's a lot here. First proposal was that justification is that which comes from deep within oneself and then you paused and said, let me backtrack. You said justification is the expression of soul that seeks to be seen as it is instead of merely being looked at. You expounded a little bit about the distinction between those two. And by being seen, you mean see the self as it really is. Justification then was why I did this or that, and others can take that at face value, or it's something deeper. So these are these layers of reality in the self and in the justification that are coming through. And then in response to the midwife's question about bad justification as a contrast, you said a bad justification is a kind of false appreciation in the language realm but it's sort of superficial. Versus when it involves the sacred, it's more about what's human for the justification. It doesn't involve something like the wave function so that I just see, I've collapsed into seeing what was meant by what was said. But there exists something like an opening in my horizon. You mentioned my note taking. I paraphrase. I don't remember what words you used, but I said like two-faced use of language is clearly not enough, and that was about false justification or bad justification. There needs to be some sort of recognition that language is a tool that's used to act in the world, and I think you were meaning instrumental, right? If you want to do X, you need a tool, like to drive a nail in, you need a hammer, and then that collapses everything into that, and that's limited. Justification is more than that. For example, when you really want to drive a point home, you can use the language, but it's not necessarily justification. And I would add that those are similar and they seem similar, but you're talking about a really deeper kind of justification. You're trying to introduce the idea that justification is not a one-sided process. Also, not only in relation even with the sacred, but also this kind of interpersonal or social, when it's done correctly, it points to the sacred. Because of what's said propositionally, we know we're accessing something greater when the justification language is correct. The process is dialectical and relationship. You're doing it with Robert, for example, with language. So it has this social dimension. It's a group process, and it puts you in relation with the sacred. You're not sure what that means, if it's just shared humanity, but your final proposal was justification is the collective process we engage in to put ourselves in right relation with the sacred, which is the minimal of which is our shared humanity. Our shared humanity is at least a necessary part of the sacred. That's my scribing.
Yeah, thank you, Ray. That's great.
Beautiful. Well, as a vibe, I will just say shared joyous play. Both of you, it was just a constant note of play, openness with both of you, lots of smile. Even when you got stuck, even when it was like not sure the communication and sort of clarifying, going back and forth, you both kept this spirit of joyous play that was really beautiful to see.
Thanks, Ray.
Mission accomplished. Yeah, we did it. That's already more than any goal I could ever have today. So holy moly. Yeah, that was amazing, Martin. I really appreciated. You just kept digging in. That was what it was. So Ryan left us in such like a mystery, I thought, in some ways, because we started very analytically and we ended in kind of like a Neoplatonic religious kind of place, I would say. And then you really kept digging in, and I kept wanting to follow the logos, and it was really it was cool the way you articulated pushing us past our own reasoning, which is, I think, where me and Rick were worried about, where justification can be incredibly parasitic. I mean, so it was cool that you were saying, like, we need to go beyond ourselves. And I mean, that's metanoia, right? So you really were like, there needs to be metanoia and good justification. So that's the best. I think mission accomplished.
Right.
Sweet. So I'll propose to Ryan now, and
Direct.
Right.
or to
Rick's midwife.
Rick. Oh, you're right. Oh, I got so excited. I miss you, Ryan. We'll have to do this again sometime. So I'll propose to Rick. Yeah, I'm going to propose justification when it's virtuous, as you said, it involves thinking in language. As Ryan said, it can involve like a goodness in that it's pulling us towards this moreness or suchness or spirit. I love that. It's like, what word do we even use? We ended on the word mystery, which I love. And then, so it might involve like a lot of risk, I guess, because if we don't understand it completely, like Meno's paradox, then we're like vulnerable to this thing. So I want to propose that maybe some justification is incredibly vulnerable. There's like an element of trust, but also that like good justification can make the world more beautiful. Like, it's not just this superficial thing that Martin was saying. Like, if we justify well, we could actually like change our futures, I think.
That's a lot. So let me just paraphrase. Justification, when it is virtuous, involves thinking, language, goodness, pulls us toward moreness, suchness, spirit, mystery. Maybe some justification is vulnerable, requires an element of trust. But if we justify well, we can change our future. Can you condense that somehow, or pluck out a part of that to speak a little more?
Yeah, so I was thinking about this.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, I was thinking about decision making, because we're a decision making species. Like, a lot of animals only make decisions when like the weather changes and they're like, oh, there's a storm. But we decide to start foundations, conferences. We decide to, like, should I homeschool my child or send them to public school? Should I take, to use like let me find a really simple, choice. Do I pick the black shirt, or do I pick the white shirt, or the playful Joe Rogan shirt, or wear ponytails today, or what? Like, choices matter as a human being. And so we're like this decision-making creature. It's boring. It's like almost anti-Heideggerian. Heidegger is like, oh, we're so mysterious. And I'm like, no, we're boring decision makers. But I think if we make good decisions, right, then we can pivot reality towards a better future than we might be on otherwise if we didn't make a new decision.
So are you suggesting, if I would use my intuition to integrate these different words and sense what's being conveyed in between the lines, that justification is tightly wedded to the fact that we're decision-making beings? So, in my proposal, I was talking about gripping and whatnot, internal, interpersonal, but there's this whole domain of us. We're agents, right? Agents are decision makers, and what we do changes the world. So, for better or worse, you're focusing on the
normatively, yes. It's not just like trivial, right? Definitely.
So we're decision makers, we're agents, and we're constantly making, to the point of boring. It's mundane. It's a fact. It's a brute fact about us, whether or not free will or whatever. That's irrelevant right now.
Very Hobbesian. I like.
We're in the decisioning process, or in the choice making process. Even when you're driving and you're not deliberating about, something happens and you move the car. So there's this whole world of voluntary or volitional action and decision, choosing, deciding, whatever, acting, agency, the whole domain of agency. How does justification show up there?
Well, right, we're agentic. We have histories and cares and hierarchical preferences, right? So especially when we get together, because when we get together, we multiply, right? Like, I have all my preferences times all your preferences, and we complexify what's happening intellectually. It's much easier to control just my life than like the life of an organization, for example. I admire Ryan for just being able to do that like multiple times in his life. Like, that's not easy. Like, there's a survivorship bias, so maybe Ryan is lucky and not smart, but like, people that succeed at decision making change the world, and they even create value that they can start nonprofits with. So I mean, that's kind of what I mean by, I love what you're saying. You're languaging it as like, there's this, we're cursed almost with agency, and then part of that, like, there's more than just justification, but like, because there's imagination and there's cares I'm mentioning and stuff like that. But like, the part of us that justifies, like, because we could rationalize for a decade, for example, or we could justify something that's risky and dive into it and go, holy crap, we just saw global warming, or we just tricked Putin to not be so mean, or whatever, because we came up with this new decision that never existed on Earth before.
So I like everything that you're saying, but I want to zero in on, have you amplify a little bit, because these two things are often confused. And I think rationalizing, the contrast suggests that rationalizing is bad justifying.
Yeah.
So in the absence of rationalizing, what's good about non-rationalizing justification?
What do you non-rationalizing? Justification that isn't rationalizing. You mean?
Yeah. Justification.
That was like a philosophy professor. I had to use ChatGPT really quick to decode the affixes that you just used.
Yeah, rationalizing. Rationalizing, I want to help you just a little bit. Rationalizing, by stating what I think the negative is, rationalize involves using justificatory language to give the appearance of justification that is not properly to be justified.
Right. Because we bullshit ourselves, and we're so like, I almost said like an insulting word. We're so naive sometimes that we trust our own bullshitting and we internalize our own ideological positions, and we go like, I know the truth, even though we actually know it's an opinion of ours, and we get kind of modally confused, I think. So yeah, I think, because that's why I don't think justifying is just beautiful always, unlike virtue, unlike like true courage, or like a compassion that saves your child or something like that, which I think is undeniably virtuous. So I think, it's tricky, because whenever you start justifying, I think actually Ryan was saying this in the beginning, and you were as well. We're talking about things that we don't know about, because we're planning something that's either new, or that you have knowledge that I don't, and I have knowledge you don't. So there's a lot of uncertainty. And then there's all these human egos, right? Like we've talked about going beyond ourselves. That almost implies an ego. All these pathologos, Ryan was saying, we could easily justify like horrible behavior for like decades. And we can even, like, I don't know if you know about Tony Robbins, that guy. He'll tell audience members ridiculous things on a whim. And I've seen him like tell people to break up with their husband. He's never met them. He met the person that he's telling this to do for like 2 minutes. And he's like, look, and they go, oh, I justify it because he's really smart and I'm dumb. And then they have a horrible, I would say, life decision, because they just ended a 20-year relationship because of a conference they went to or something.
So those are examples of bad justification.
Right.
Can you say something from your own experience that might be the kind of positive use of justification?
Well, yeah, when you have like a metanoetic moment. Yeah. So if you say like, I've been justifying these behaviors, and I go like, oh, that was foolish justification, or really more likely like a friend or someone says like, hey, you can have higher standards or whatever, because a lot of justifications become standards if you think about the relationship. So going like, oh, you've been justifying your behaviors poorly, you should quit McDonald's. Like I've eaten 200 Big Macs in 1 year and like 0 this year. And that was really not like a change in any kind of knowledge, but really my justification upon my judgment on my knowledge or whatever.
All right. So I'm not suggesting that we're done, but can you recap a little bit of your proposal by now? Because a lot has been amplified.
Yeah. No, I think kind of what I was saying. So if good justification is using reason, not just rationalizing, and doing it in such a way that probably preserves the good of our complex character and the complex characters of other people, and can pull us towards even better futures than we would otherwise have if we never tried to reason and started justifying our potential actions as boring decision-making creatures that we are.
Ryan, you're the scribe. Could you repeat that last one back for me?
Yeah, his proposal is that good justification is using reason, not just rationalization, in such a way that preserves the good of our complex character and the complex characters of other people, and can pull us towards better futures than we would otherwise have if we had never justified with reason, versus justifying actions as boring decision-making creatures.
Wow, great capture. So say a little bit more about how it preserves the good of our complex characters or those of others. I've kind of understand that, but it's abstract.
It is abstract. Yeah, this is like Pierre Grimes taught me this, because if you don't preserve the past, then you can do injustice accidentally. So like, if we don't honor our parents, for example, then we might think we're being really just and justifying really smart. Oh, we're so novel and cool. We're going to go to the moon. We're Elon Musk or whatever. But we're not even like caring about what our parents cared about. We've just discarded history. So that's what I meant by kind of because Ryan talked about the pathologos, and that involves history. You can't have a trauma that didn't happen in the past and that isn't rippling into your present.
So a justification might not always, but might, this is the contextually appropriate thing, require honoring the historical antecedents of the context of what are the values that are at stake, especially if somebody might even believe that they're giving a justification that's good, but they're in a way pushing an agenda that's insensitive to the overall. That's what you're trying to say, something like that. It would,
because a lot of people are so abstract.
Yeah, I'm a philosopher. I can make really good arguments for all sorts of things that I might want to do. And they might be trampling over other people's, what did you call it? Preserving their good character or something like that.
Souls. Martin said soul a lot, like that word a lot.
That's another interesting.
Because even second order, right? You're one of your mentors, Harry Frankfurt, like states so beautifully, right? We can have second order justifications. So we can even reflect upon our opinion and become even more convicted, right? We can go like, I'm so right. But if we look, like Martin saying, outside, like Ryan saying beyond, and look into our past and say, oh, am I screwing up everything the past gave me? Because really, I didn't make the roads, the language. I didn't invent the universities I went to that pay some of us here even. And like, so I could be so arrogant and have such a, what do they call it? Hubris. That's what the Greeks would say, that I justify like things that destroy the past that was so instrumental in pulling all of us out of the mud, so to speak.
So are you saying that justification can't float free ahistorically, is a way you might want to put it?
Yeah, why would it want to? Yeah, I think that's almost the devil. Someone trying to say, does time and space don't matter? Only my thoughts matter. Only my rationality matters. Yeah.
So justifications for utopian ideologies are violating this norm that you're articulating.
Yeah, because they're quasi-religious. They're not actually religious. Like, because Ryan was invoking, I think, like kind of religion, or at least what was sacred to a person. Because religion sometimes becomes this thing that's like, oh, the whole culture owns the religion. But he would like that going beyond what I think, and it's it's very, our minds are so powerful, right? But they move reality, and I think this conference talks about the Anthropocene, and so now we literally move the reality of all the species on Earth, potentially other countries. Like that wasn't true even 200 years ago. So yeah, I think justification is even, Greg's not foolish for caring so much about it. I don't think I've learned to appreciate it more as I've been like grappling with it the last 4 weeks or whatever.
Yeah. Can we close the proposing round now?
I feel heard.
All right. So let me appreciate, Robert, the way that you're so comfortable swimming around. You described me once as an otter swimming in the ocean of meditation. You were just swimming around in the ocean of this logos, as far as I could tell. I love the way that you just kind of so spontaneously generating so many rich ideas. I especially appreciated, well, every one of them, but this last idea about preserving character. Yeah, I mean, I can imagine that there may be some hypothetical scenarios where that's not relevant, but then I would say if it's relevant, then it's important, right? So I really appreciate that unexpected dimension of it. And I'm glad that you, even yourself, said that you appreciate justification on another level relative to UTOK. I'm not sure if anybody here realized, I think I might have shared this idea with a couple of you, that even in print, Greg and I have debated the importance of justification on the person plane. I think there are so many other things that are important on the person plane, but now I could appreciate, especially Robert, when you made it clear to me that it's something hovering around, it's some kind of zone of normativity that constrains and affords more constraining agency itself. as the kinds of beings that we are. And this goes back to what Ryan said about it's something that comes out of our nature that we have to justify. And that kind of came through you in another way, because our nature is we're agents, and we're interpersonal agents, and we're dialectically engaged with each other. We do it with and through each other. That's how we understand. So much came through, and you were the last one. And I love the way that you pulled it all together. Anticipation. I mean, even though we're not going to go another round, what I would say is not just about you, Robert, but all four of us seem to touch on aspects of justification. Well, the three of you, I had mine own already, but in the process with Ryan, mine were pulled out, and I still felt like my original thing was just amplifying and growing and like fractally expanding into that moreness. This process was just absolutely fascinating to me. So I really appreciate it, not just you, Robert, but the whole thing. But my anticipation is that, okay, let's just say there was some fourfold magnification because of the four of us. There's like 16-fold layers right outside of that. I don't want to put words to any of them, but I'm very aware of how our language, Martin, collapse of the wave function, language, Krishnamurti would say, is always dead. It's always limited. It's frozen in time. It's about the past. It's like the collapse. It makes a particle out of a wave. You know, this kind and agency in life is waving process. That was the last session, right? So my anticipation is about where that might go, and I have some aporia, some uncertainty about it. That's the end of my anticipation. And so now we go over to the scribe. Who's the scribe? Oh, Ryan. Yeah.
Yeah, I'll just quickly say, I think you covered it really well there, Rick. I think I'll just say that you started, Robert, with this proposal of justification, virtue. You basically wrapped up everything that came before in a way that I really appreciated. And then you pointed out that justification is incredibly vulnerable. There's an element of trust, and good justification make the world more beautiful isn't just superficial, justifying why we can change our futures. Then the turn kind of came around decision-making and agency. And then you separated that rationalizing is a kind of bad justification. We're bullshitting ourselves. Good justification involves metanoia, and it's recognizing a foolish and turning. And then your last full proposal was that good justification is using reason, not just rationalization, in a way that preserves the good. Our complex characters, others, pull us towards better futures we otherwise would have had if we never justified with reason. And that you then sort of explicate that a little bit further of it. It must preserve the past. And it's like the past, the present, the depth, the height, and the future is kind of like where you ended. Like the justification goes all over. And that's where we ended.
Gotta go big or go home, right?
That's right. It's appropriate for the ending. You wrapped it all up and took it big. Martin?
It gave me a lot of food. Yeah.
Quick bite notes, and then I guess we should open it up for Q&A, right? Yeah, from my perspective, that was really nice to witness. I think that Robert, obviously, you had a very engaging way of present your argument, but also I think that exemplified in a way that what we've been discussing, that you cannot really take a historical perspective of things because you pull in examples of like real life examples you talked about. You even use history to present your argument, to propose something here. So that was nice to see, but very energetic. I think that you were more energetic overall from a like constancy perspective compared to Rick. Rick was more attentive, paying attention, asking very pointed questions, good questions. Rick, you got very energetic at times when you were trying to draw distinctions between things that Robert was saying. So yeah, I think that felt really playful to me, that you guys were like moving your hands, making a lot of gestures, moving around your head. So yeah, very nice.
I would say one thing. Normally, if we had the time, the four of us would then just go free flow without any sequence. And the conception is that all the blogs we brought hopefully sparked the logos, and then we would be in a kind of flow state of dialogue, deepening into that aporetic, whatever was anticipated and whatnot, still continuing with the threads that come out of that and seeing where they go. but we're going to open it up to Q&A now. Is that correct? Because we only have 15 minutes left. So I would encourage people who do participate to conceive of yourselves as engaging in that fluid, dynamic dialogos thing that the four of us, would have otherwise done just us, but now including everyone. Everyone's invited to participate, not just with questions, but with contributions. Yeah. Okay, so let's take. I'm going to change the visuals and remove the spotlights from everybody. And if you don't have it set up on your computer, you can pick to where the gallery view so you could see everybody. And just feel free to unmute yourself. I don't think you need to raise your hand.
Brandon, do you want to see a question just unmuted? And maybe like make the point if you have a point, like just jump in the flow.
Yeah, I'm not going to lie. I'm a little intimidated watching that process and everywhere you got that. Like, I feel weirdly enough like I'm kind of interrupting this quaternary flow you all had.
It doesn't feel that way to us. Actually, having all of you in and even seeing the chat, I feel like added a lot. And so I'm really excited for whatever you have to say. Please.
Okay. Originally, I had asked about like justification in a closed economy, and Rick saying about his time being disposable, it kind of triggered me to ask, time being a very precious, valuable, limited resource, how much time should we spend functionally examining ourselves, trying to justify our actions? And I refined it later, and I said, in practice, at what level of pulling back and examining self, not unlike Jung's analytical self, in the justification process is potentially most functional and justifiably reasonable. Just want to throw that out to everyone. I don't have an answer, just throwing it out there.
Two things light up for me, and I'll just say this as offerings for everybody and everyone else jump in. One is, of course, the unexamined life is not worth living. And so like in some ways, how could we put too much time towards offering ourselves to higher and higher levels of authority for justification, right? Like higher and higher levels of standards and involving more and more of our life and more of our psyche into that. And it also makes me think of if we take the end time story of Christianity, of at least as a true myth for the sake of this discussion, right? As a myth that points to something. There's something about God on the throne of Judgment Day, of that being the ultimate end of all things, all time and the highest authority, looking back of everything as that ultimate justification endpoint in that makes me think of like, well, that's kind of, I think the idea of that is like to offer towards the highest at the end of time, the highest, and that it's all of life being offered. That makes you wonder how much this is actually a flow of awareness in all kinds of things versus like set aside time. So those are the two things that lit up for me. How does that land for you, Brandon? What does anybody else think?
Yeah, you immediately helped spark in me this comfort in this notion of, oh, there's not a right answer. It's just an ongoing process of more being revealed. Yeah. Thank you for that, Ryan.
And as the person who mentioned the concept of disposable time, just one thought that I wanted to throw into the mix about this topic is that I had mentioned at some point, like if you're in a flow state, there might not be any need to step out of it and check yourself, right? So the concept of disposable time only seems to come up when you're doing what Robert said, which is pausing and deliberating, right? Am I spending my time right? Oh, I have too many things, so I have to prioritize or whatever. So if you're managing the agent arena relationship and your relationship with time and activities and responsibilities is all sort of fluid and going well, then maybe you don't need to do that. But maybe just periodically, it's an instinct of human beings, that's going back to Ryan, to justify ourselves. Am I optimally gripping? Am I functioning well? And I would put a different spin on Socrates. Robert Nozick, one of my favorite analytic philosophers, said, that's a little elitist. Let's rephrase that about the unexamined life not being worth living. The examined life is at least your own. success.
Mm.
And
That's beautiful.
The more you examine it, the more authentic your life becomes.
That's beautiful.
Yeah, it's like almost like the Plato's Cave, Rick, where they start to look at the shadows and use their reasoning. I don't remember. Rick and I read Plato together just to give some context. We were with Christopher Mastropietro, president of the Vervaeke Foundation, and talking about Plato's Cave. And Christopher brought up the idea that, like, if everyone's in the cave and some of them start reasoning and others don't, that reasoning, that outward reasoning, is what can like lead you out of the cave into a beyond that you've never even experienced if you stay within like the myth, so to speak. So yeah, it's very interesting. I think it's like top down, it's easy to say there should be 4.2 ounces of justification per steak or whatever. But like when you're in your life, like Ryan's saying, like live like the eschaton is happening with this sense of urgency that I might not get to love my daughter tomorrow or my son or text my best friend or whatever it is, because one day that'll be true. I mean, it's a sad fact or whatever.
Robert, mentioning the cave right after the flow thing, there's something functionally similar to people who are kind of somnambulistically engaged on a first order level with their lives, who never stop to reflect, and someone who's in a flow state, but who's a much more kind of evolved or higher order being. That's interesting. I never thought about that.
It kind of links in a way to something that I've been thinking about from your question, Brandon, which is, and this is perhaps like subtext in what you asked, which is the relationship between justification and the creation of time. While we are otherwise engaging in flow, when we engage our metacognition, we are creating time in a way. And what's the utility to create time? Maybe that's the way to kind of relate, to see where are we oriented towards, right? Anyways, some interesting thought there.
Yeah, I would also say that metacognitive inquiry about your relationship with your existence is a way of reciprocally, optimally gripping if you don't check yourself every now and then. It's part of the process of being a metacognitive being, is to just be aware of, okay, how am I?
That's why I think John Vervaeke talks about other people's opinion of you too, because if someone says, oh, you're really smart and mindful, or you're really doing well, or like you can go like, oh, and then that way you're not so much self-monitoring how good you're doing, but someone can point something out that you're doing well. And then you don't have to worry, am I reasoning enough? Am I over-rationalizing? Because feedback out externally is so humbling. And sometimes you just go, oh, wow, I didn't realize I was being so uptight or so relaxed. Like both can happen, right? You can be too laid back and trying to do something. So the idea of predetermining what an optimal grip would be is paradoxically probably impossible. So, but we have prosach, we have attention, and we have friendship, and maybe reason. I don't know yet, but.
Well, Robert, I think you were describing what John speaks about repeatedly in transjectivity, the importance of that process.
Yeah, it's very different than subjectivity. Subjectivity can lead to a lot of like solipsistic, relativistic kind of stuff. But when you're always bouncing off of each other and caring for people and seeing if they like the care, or not caring for people and seeing what happens, then all of a sudden you go, oh, wow, just my attention and my care are informing my future and other people's future as well. It's a kind of Neoplatonic co-creation rather than this kind of billiards ball external forces model. But I find it powerful. Like Rick, actually, we started meeting about virtue epistemology and talked about that some of the first times as well. And it's a very aspirational model that's very different than the I don't know, like death and taxes materialist model that we often presuppose is at the foundation of our values. Maybe, I don't know. Like Rick's the philosopher. What do you think about that, Rick? Do we need to pay attention to life, or can we just know a priori before we get out of bed?
There's no algorithmic answer to that dichotomy. It's a kind of false dichotomy. Life is so much more complex.
The answer is you can know it all. You just have to make your bed. As long as you make your bed, then you're set.
It is the doing. That's the problem with the justification, just stopping at that level, because what you do matters. Leonardo da Vinci and Bruce Lee.
It was
stuff would say that.
It was a Jordan Peterson joke, but I get you, Rob.
Yeah. Kermit the Frog appears with his high-pitched voice and sells his books to us or whatever.
So in Plato's Apology, Socrates is giving an account of his life. He's justifying his life and his behavior, which he's being charged with. And the word apology is some kind of, I forget what the linguistic term for it. It's like a transliteration or something. It doesn't quite translate in English. Apologia, or however it's pronounced in ancient Greek, is an account, not an apology. It's like an explanation which justifies behavior. Now, if you give a full apology, you will give an explanation that justified your behavior, even if you acknowledge that it was something erroneous about it. You will say the reasons why you believed what you were doing made sense at the time, et cetera, et cetera. So at Apologia, I'm hoping that this group, even if not now, but when it comes to you down the road, will email us and give us the name of this virtue that we've been trying to capture. Account is not good enough either, because you can give an account which is fraudulent. Yeah. I hope that I didn't just derail the conversation by asking.
No, Rick, you're beckoning people to wonder more about this. That's what I hear you doing. I hear you saying, like, hey, be hungry for this. Like Rudolf Steiner would say that about the Platonists. He'd say their souls should be hungry for virtue. And that's why I was so impressed by the course. And maybe, Ryan, could you say more about the Vervaeke Foundation and how they offer this and how people could be doing these practices? Because I even see, people here interested in it and saying positive things. And I'm sure you have the most information or knowledge, I should say, about how people could.
Well, thanks. I'll say something. There's a website called awakentomeaning.com, which is a place for a lot of the practices that like this one. And there's a couple of different ways, including a 12-week course. And then there's some different practice sessions. So awakentomeaning.com would be the best. Or sign up for the newsletter at vervaekefoundation.org. Either one should help get all that information. Yeah.
And Greg has a forum, is that right? Like the UTOK forums also exist for this kind of conversation.
Are there any other questions or additions to the dialogue from anyone?
Well, I will just press that request again, because I think it became very clear to me how important right justification is, and how damaging wrong justification is, especially like right now in this age of misinformation, right? People are using justification for all sorts of things, and it's like almost like what Socrates was battling against with all the sophistry in his day, just using language in a kind of what John calls philia Nikeia, right? In an attempt to persuade others towards one's agenda or view or whatever. If we don't have,
if you justify really bad things, you can hurt your soul. I think there's young people making horrible decisions right now, and they're justifying it for fame or money. Like I've started dating again, and I'm looking at like what the dating world looks like. And it's tragic. The loneliness epidemic that people talk about, people justify playing video games all day or being on YouTube all day and then not having friends. It's really like, this has been very educational for me in the philosophical sense, to just wonder what the impact of justifying things is. And Rick is such a beautiful soul, because he'll entertain thoughts at such a high level, but then give like a philosophical response. I'm like a dreamer, and Ryan, as you can tell, is passionate. Martin is a super friendly person, but Rick is so philosophical. So he means this when he says, hey, think about this. This could be something worthwhile to wonder about. I don't know. I'm so impressed by this whole talk. It's been very fun.
Robert, in like this great book by Benjamin Lee Whorf, the Whorf, whoever the other guy is, hypothesis. Yeah. In his book, Language, Thought, and Reality, he talks about, and this is like, not just his idea, but if there are words in a language for something, those are affordances for a way of recognizing and understanding. If they don't exist in the language, right? Like double speak and all that, right? Then that limits our ability to think because of how we're habituated to use the language games that we were indoctrinated in. So much of what matters to everybody in this space, we don't have terms for. We've got to play around with dialectic to dialogos to just get even a little handle on something that matters so much to humanity. If we had a name, and we have a name for rationalization, which is a bad use of justification. We need a name for, like we have the word miracle, that's a positive supernatural event. We don't have a word for the negative supernatural event, right?
This is that tragedy.
Yeah, but those need not be supernatural. I'm just giving that as an example. And like in the Amazonian, indigenous peoples there, they have hundreds of names for different kinds of parrots, but no word for parrot. The Inuit people close to the North Pole, they have 50 some odd words for snow because that matters in the world. So they're able to communicate easily about that and think clearly about it. It's this kind of snow and that kind of snow. We don't have a word for it. We need a word. Very important. Sorry, Ryan.
Oh, no, I didn't mean to interrupt. I think it's a really good call because it feels to me like it's multiple things. There's a mindfulness and awareness. There's an attuning. There's a connection to others to create a normative standard. There's a looking through. There's like a number of movements. But if we could name that, that's something we could practice to become aware of, which I feel like walking away from this, I'm going to be more aware of my own practices of justification through my life and how to orient towards that overall that dance, that good justification, virtuous justification dance. I think that's really helpful and beautiful. So that's a great way to end this, Rick. Thank you. Thank you, everybody. This was gorgeous.
And over. Yeah. Thank you, guys. Awesome.
Martin, can you just share a takeaway, Martin, for 2 minutes? Can you just share a takeaway? I feel like Rick and Brian gave beautiful ones. We would love to have you.
Yeah, for sure. Now, this is the very first time that the four of us practice together this, which I'm very appreciative of. But yeah, I'm the first time participating in this Consilience conference, so I couldn't have asked for a better opportunity to practice with this group and to contribute to Greg's project. So really hope that all the call outs to get this practice undergoing for you, all of you, if you can make that 12-week course. I highly recommend it. I've done it myself, and that's taken a very important shape in my life. So, and it trickles down to a lot of the different things that we do in our lives. It's just not like a high-level abstract thing that it's only limited to that to those particular occasions where we can practice it. But also, you take that away. I go and do my everyday business, and I engage with people in a different way. So I think I cannot overstate how important something like this is in modern times. So yeah, there's that. Thank you very much to all of you.
Awesome. That was so beautiful. Thank you everyone for coming.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you all.